Welcome back to The Explainer. Now, since we're all pretty familiar with Nāgārjuna's earlier chapters, we know he definitely doesn't pull his punches. But today, we're deploying his ultimate 11-step diagnostic tool directly onto the most fragile, problematic area of Buddhist metaphysics, the junction of causation. We're analyzing Chapter 21 of the Mūlamadhyamakakārikā, which zeroes in on the precise moment of origination and disappearance. Our goal here is to systematically tear down the illusion of absolute causality and reveal the incredibly fluid, centerless reality operating right underneath the hood.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll look at the triad of causal junction, deconstruct it with the tetralemma, explore the union of the two truths, expand into the generalized tetralemma, and finally abide in the middle way. We're going to apply that Madhyamaka scalpel right to the micro gap between moments and ultimately prove that karmic continuity is really just a conveniently useful illusion.
All right, Section 1, the triad of causal junction. Let's just bypass the pleasantries and identify exactly what we're targeting here.
Step 1 of our reasoning. We have to identify the three spheres of an action at this causal junction. So think of a real-world example, right? Like striking a match to get a flame, or a moment of deep anger turning into an actual physical action. What's actually happening in that tiny micro-transition? Well, we can conceptually slice the architecture of that event into three spheres: the disappearance, or the going, of the cause, the relation or junction itself, and the origination or coming of the effect. This triad structure is everywhere in Buddhist theory. It governs two consecutive moments of consciousness and abhidharma, the transition between the 12 links of dependent origination, rebirths, even crossing from samsara into nirvana. We're looking right at the hinges of reality here.
Moving into Section 2, deconstructing with the tetralemma. This is where things get really interesting, because we're introducing the trapdoor of reality itself.
We have to ask a really vital question to corner these concepts of origination and disappearance into an inescapable logical trap. This isn't just wordplay. Nāgārjuna demands absolute precision about the temporal physics of a passing moment. So think about that micro gap between a cause ceasing and an effect arising. Do they overlap for a while? Meaning, are they identical in that moment, or do they exist completely separately in time, meaning they're totally different? If we can't answer this coherently, the entire bureaucracy of karma and causality just completely collapses.
Let's actually slow down for a second, because the absolute absurdity of inherent causality really starts to show itself here. Look, if the cause and effect perfectly overlap, they're simultaneous, right? And if they're simultaneous, one isn't producing the other. It's not causality, it's a metaphysical traffic jam. Birth and death literally cannot take place in the exact same nanosecond. But conversely, if they are strictly separate in time, then the cause finishes its existence completely before the effect even starts. But wait, if the cause is completely ceased, it's a non-entity. It's a powerless ghost. Causal force absolutely cannot magically jump across a void of nothingness to kickstart the next moment. It just doesn't work.
And that brings us to a massive blockade in verse 21. Nāgārjuna points out that if there is a stream of existence, it has to span the past, present, and future. But how can a discrete, inherently existing cause span time? The past is gone, the future isn't here yet, and the present is this infinitely slicing razor's edge. The beginning and end of a temporal sequence simply cannot logically interact if they inherently solidly exist as independent things. Because of this mechanical failure at the junction, there is no inherent continuity, but there's also no complete discontinuity either of any causal chain, action, or karmic cycle. The engine of reality just doesn't work the way we assume it does.
So for Step 2, we use the tetralemma to decisively corner any opponent trying to defend absolute causality. They try to say the cause and effect are identical. The logic breaks. Different? It breaks. Existent? Non-existent? Continuous? Discontinuous? Both? Neither? Every single rigid framework we try to force onto this causal junction just shatters into logical absurdity. They can't be permanent. They can't be impermanent. Not dual, not non-dual. Dependent, independent, you name it. Every fixed position leads straight to a contradiction. We've effectively dissolved the conceptual glue holding inherent causality together.
Okay, on to Section 3, union of the two truths. Let's see how this logically builds into the twin epiphanies of Madhyamaka philosophy.
This leads us to Step 3 of our reasoning. Because all those alternatives lead to absurdity, these three spheres at the junction of causality are completely empty of inherent existence. They are never absolute. And what this means for your daily practice is actually profound. Inside the root cause of your suffering, or the supposedly inevitable effect of your past karma, there is no frozen, absolute core. There's no real, independent essence inside a cause or an effect, which means there's no absolute opposition or relation between them. The junction is radically open. Inherent causality is completely untenable. But, and this is a big but, this doesn't leave us stranded in some bleak nihilism. Step 4 reveals that they are dependently co-originated. These spheres are inseparable, interdependent, and co-evolving. Reality is basically a continuous, fluid river. Our minds act like conceptual cookie cutters, artificially slicing into this river, drawing arbitrary borders and slapping on labels like cause and effect just so we can function. They are mere designations. They're highly practical, relatively useful tools we rely on to navigate the world, but at the end of the day, they're just tools.
And here is step 5, noting the brilliant union of the two truths. This is the paradoxical genius, literally the absolute mic drop of Nāgārjuna's philosophy. Things can only functionally cause other things conventionally precisely because they are ultimately empty of rigid, frozen essence. Think about that for a second. If causes had an absolute independent essence, they'd be locked in, totally unchangeable, entirely unable to interact with anything else. Emptiness is literally the very condition that makes the functional conventional world possible in the first place.
All right, section 4, the generalized tetralemma. Let's step out of the rigorous logical teardown for a minute and explore the phenomenological result of all this.
Step 6. Because these three spheres at the junction are dependently co-horizon and empty, they functionally behave like a mirage. They are there, yet not there, kind of dancing like a reflection on the surface of a moving ocean. The chain of existences, the whole wheel of samsara itself, it's not a rigid sequence of iron links dragging us along. It's an entirely conceptual, fluid reflection. Our actions definitely matter conventionally, for sure, but they are utterly weightless in their ultimate nature.
Expanding on this in step 7, we bring in the generalized tetralemma to affirm that reality's true nature is way beyond all conditioned, dualistic conceptual proliferation. Look, our brains evolved to see the universe in binary dyads, right? This versus that, self versus other, cause versus effect. But ultimate reality simply does not operate on primate logic. For whatever this is, the three spheres are not this, they're not non-this, they're not both, and they're not neither. And there's no fifth option. They absolutely refuse to be boxed in by any of our tidy conceptual categories or extreme models.
Which finally brings us to section 5, abiding in the middle way. Let's talk about the liberated application of Nāgārjuna's reasoning in our actual daily lives. Step 9 leads us to a crucial realization, adopting the middle way. The absolute best attitude toward the three spheres of any action is to remain completely free from all extremes. You avoid realism and you avoid nihilism. But as advanced practitioners, you also have to carefully dodge the more subtle conceptual traps, like relationism, processism, or radical monism. You know, the idea that everything is just one big cosmic blob. We have to remain entirely free from the extremes of this and non-this. And critically, we have to let go of the middle itself. We don't abide in both or neither. We just rest comfortably in the total unfindability of it all.
For step 10, we learn to act conventionally without acting in absolute terms. We absolutely can and should use karmic cycles, causality, and the 12 links as useful tools. When you meditate, for instance, you use the conventional tool of focusing on the breath to cause relaxation. But you do it knowing that the breath, the you, and the relaxation are fluid, empty designations. You use the tools without attachment, without reification, and without an absolute grip, intimately knowing their true empty nature. And step 11, our final realization, reveals ultimate liberation. Released from the suffocating hold of absolute causes and effects, the terrifying weight of samsara is just gone. It's destroyed. We can finally perceive everything, even the transition from suffering to nirvana, as primordially equal, pure, perfect, complete, divine. We perceive this in a strictly non-dual sense. We step off the endless treadmill of causality, and that allows us to peacefully abide in reality exactly as it is, suchness.
So we'll end on this provocative thought. Nāgārjuna just dismantled the engine of the universe, proving that the causal machine is conceptually imputed. This means you are not the absolute, inherently existing cause of your actions, nor are you the absolute victim of your effects. So, what does that mean for the concept of you making a choice today? Well, you are simply a beautifully empty, fluid space where an infinite universe of conditions briefly comes together. Just keep that profound realization in mind the next time you brutally take the blame or fiercely take the credit for a supposed effect in your life.